Need to get rid of that.
No, yeah.
There we go.
Figure it on your own.
That's all right. So now we are recording, getting a little bit of a late start, so we'll just extend our meeting a little bit to make up for lost time, if that's all right with everyone. It's later for you folks on the East Coast, but anyway, it's great to see you all. Welcome to the winter term 2022 Harp class. Delighted to have you all here. And I just have to move one other little thing. A little closer to the mic, a little more view of the harp. Now, everybody see me all right? It got remarkably warm in here. Okay, so let us begin. This term is, I got the theme, Irish-Scottish harp connection. I've been doing a fair amount of research on this, and there's a lot of wonderful material written about this, actually in Alison Kinnear's book. So I'm going to send you all the information about it, but here's what it looks like. It's the harp key, and there's Alison Kinnear. She lives in Scotland, and she put out this album, which I sent you a link to the one tune that we're working on. If you could see that all right, the harp key. Rory Dahl's Port. This is really kind of a fulcrum kind of a tune to really show the connection and the divergences of the Irish harp tradition and the Scottish harp tradition. And as Alison mentions, and it has been my theory, that right around the 17th century, up until the 17th century, the two traditions were pretty much one. They were one and the same, because the harpers and the bards traveled freely back and forth from country to country between Ireland and Scotland. They shared their music, they shared their ideas, they learned each other's tunes. What with the social upheavals, the Jacobite Rising and other things in Ireland, the bardic tradition began to die. And that was when the divergence began to happen between the two styles. And the Scottish style is distinctly different from the Irish when we hear the two, nowadays. And it's a little difficult to discern exactly what that difference is. But when you become familiar with the music and you listen to them, you hear it. And one of the subtleties I've come to notice is the way rhythm is approached. Even when it's a freestyle rhythm, rhythmically, the Scottish music feels a little different from the Irish. And but we're not going to worry about all that stuff for now. We'll kind of sprinkle in bits and pieces of history later. I think what we want to do now is just get started right away with some warm-up exercises, which will lead us directly into this first tune called Rory Dahl's Port. One thing that I thought was so interesting about this, and it's one of the things that sets the Scottish harp music slightly apart from the Irish, is that they tended to have theme with variations. And even Carolyn himself, and one of the pieces we're going to work on later on, When She Can Bend, with Carolyn's variations. There's only two known pieces that Carolyn wrote his own variations to, and they were Scottish tunes. So this was kind of a thing with Scottish music to have a theme with variations, and this ties in with the very old pibroch music of Scotland, the piping tradition. And but enough talking about all that. I'm delighted to have you all here. I know that some of you are closer to beginner level and some are intermediate, some maybe even a little further advanced. So I think you'll find something for all of you, even here within this piece. For those of you who don't sight read music, don't be intimidated by the 3 sheets of paper there. But we're going to go through some of these variations, and not necessarily even all the ones that I circled. For you beginners, the most important one really is the first theme, and that's the very first line, number 1. And I circled them, I numbered them 1 through 14. So basically there's 1 is the initial theme, and each line is just 4 bars long. So there's the initial theme and then 13 variations. Now, what I just discovered today in listening to Alison Kinnaird recording again is that she has added 2 variations to this notation that she doesn't play on the recording. And those were 2 that I had not circled because I wasn't familiar with them. And I realized, well, because they're not even there on the recording. It's number 9 and 10. So you can even, well, I would cross them out because those of you who read might want to explore those sometime. I'm curious to explore them myself. So those 2 we definitely won't do. For the beginners, my hope is that you'll at least get 1 and maybe one of the others, and then the last one, 14, because it's kind of the grand culmination of this harp composition. And it has a lovely ending that's really fun to play. And of course, I add some of my own elements to the left-hand accompaniment. So you will see some divergences from Alison's arrangement and mine, but for the most part, it's the same tune. So before we even start playing this piece, let's just warm up with some exercises, and we're going to start right from the bare bones basics. We're just going to do some simple scales, and then we'll do some extended variations on those. People more familiar with my teaching will be familiar with one of the most complex variations of the scales. And then we'll do the same thing with arpeggios. And all these things will help prepare your fingers for playing the music that we're going to approach. So
before we start really quickly, I want to remind everyone to make sure they're muted. I know there are a few people who are not, just because if we're all playing and people are unmuted, it's going to be ugly for everyone.
Right. And the other problem with not muting is sometimes we get feedback. So, right. Looks like you all are.
But I meant not, I was commenting on your playing.
Got it.
I was talking
Thanks,
about the
Bob.
feedback
So,
and the lag.
I think we got it. So let's see. I think we've got mostly everybody here. I know there were 2 or 3 people that couldn't make it for the first class tonight, so we won't worry about them. And here we go. So the first thing to know is you want to be in the key of G. And so if you have levers, put the F levers on for F sharp. We just want to make sure that we have, thank you, that's my preferred one, have the harp in the key of G. And so of course, for our purposes, that means that we start on the string above the blue string. So everybody find their middle C. And that's right here on my harp, just so you know, which is pretty much in the middle of my range. I've got a full 5-octave range here. And though this arrangement in the notation goes down below this low C, which is the lowest note on the lap harps, I am going to gear this arrangement and the chorus mostly toward the lap harp range. And then for those of you who have larger harps, of course, I'm going to give you directions for extending your range down into the bass, which is the area in question for a larger harp. Okay, so middle C, then D, E, F sharp, G. So that G, string above the blue string, is where we're going to start for now with the right hand. And we're just going to play a G scale up and down. Okay, so presumably everyone's got this basic, and you position your fingers 4, 3, 2, 1. You pluck the first 3, cross under the thumb, and place on the next string, pluck the thumb, reposition. So we're just going to get very familiar with the sound of the G scale in both octaves with both hands. Now back down. cross over to the red string, reposition. So we're just going to go up and down the G scale a couple of times. Right back down, repeat the top. So we won't be repeating a lot. This is just to give you the basics to run through. Now do the same with the left hand and the lower octave. So now we're starting on G below middle C. So your thumb is on middle C itself. Ready? Begin. And back down. Okay. Now both hands together, up and down the G scale in unison, both hands at the same time. Okay, so now we're going to go back to just the right hand and do a continuous scale. And this is what I mean. When we get to the top, we won't repeat that top note, but start heading right back down. And same with when we get to the bottom, we'll head right back up. Straight back down. When you get to the bottom, straight back up. So now we have a continuous motion of the scale up and down. One more time. Going up. Straight back down. Good. Now let's do the same thing with the left hand in the lower octave, starting on G below middle C. Begin. Straight back down. One more time. And now both hands together at the same time in unison. So left hand starting on G below middle C with the fourth finger, mind you, the thumb is number 1, so 4, 3, 2, 1, and with the right hand starting on G above middle C. So we're playing the same scale in unison, an octave apart. Ready, begin. Straight back down. One more time, straight back up. Straight back down. So that's good. For beginners to be able to do that, that's pretty good. If you can keep it fluid, do it slowly as you need to, but to keep that fluid. Now we'll take this same idea and get a little more advanced with it. Now we're going to offset the two hands. So you beginners can just watch, or if you're geniuses, you can follow along. But this is a little tricky, even for the advanced people. What you're going to do is start with the left hand, play the first two notes. And now the right hand starts on the third note, okay? And they're just going to keep going in that fashion. Both hands are still doing the same thing they did before, but now they're doing it two notes apart. Okay, so we play the first two notes with the left hand. Now start the right hand. So the left hand crossed over, now the right hand crosses over. Now the left hand is going back down. Right hand still going up, left hand crosses over, right hand just started back down, etc. You probably don't need all that running commentary because it's impossible to follow. But the fact is, both hands are still doing the same thing they did before, but at different times. And all of a sudden, you've tied your brain into knots there. But the fun thing about this exercise is you can master it like any piece of music and get the hands working together and actually memorize it like muscle memory. That's the reason that I can play it and talk at the same time. Because my fingers know it so well from having done it many times. So at the end of that, the right hand has two more notes, right, to finish off, because the left hand started with two notes. Okay, there's one more stage to this exercise, which we won't do tonight because we want to move right along here. And get to the arpeggios. And then we're going to come back to another exercise, melodic exercise that will help prepare us for this piece, Rory Dahl's Port. Rory Dahl being, and this is the Scottish Rory Dahl. And if you start delving into the history, it gets a little muddled when you look up these names because there were two Rory Dahls. One was an Irish harper and one was a Scottish harper, and they both lived around the same time. And they both composed tunes and they both traveled and they both spent time in each other's countries. So it's completely impossible to extricate who really composed which piece. But we're pretty sure that Rory Dahl Morrison, that's the Scottish one, is the one who composed this piece. And of course, back in the day, none of this music was ever written down. It was all done to memory, and it was all learned by ear, passed on by ear. And the music wasn't written down. In some cases, it was during the lifetimes of these harpers by someone else listening who knew how to play other instruments and jotted down the melody. And so all that really survived was the melody. We really have nothing of the left hand, what the harpers did with their left hand. So all that has been left up to conjecture. And Allison herself has created this arrangement with the idea of, imagining what Rory Dahl would have done to accompany and to harmonize. We do know that the harmony would have been something sparse, not too many thirds, mostly open fifths, octaves, and perhaps alternating patterns. So that's what you hear in this piece. But before we get started with it, we're going to do some simple arpeggio exercises. And these are the two realms of exercises, as I always say, that are important to all harp players, all musicians for that matter. Scales relate to melody. Arpeggios relate to harmony. So scale is pretty much a linear movement up and down, right? The harp, the strings. The arpeggios, we skip strings to create the harmonies that make up chords. So the first one of these would be what we call the G arpeggio. Arpeggio is a word that simply means harp-like. One of those great old Italian words that actually derives from our instrument. Isn't that nice? But it's a universal musical term. So G arpeggio, we're going to place fingers 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, starting on the G. This is right hand first. G above middle C. Skip a string to B with the third finger. Skip the red string to D with the second finger. Now skip 2 strings to G, the octave with the thumb. So you've got G, skip a string B, skip a string D, skip 2 strings G. We're going to quickly advance beyond all this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page starting these exercises, because all of this is the basis, really, for all music. So the G arpeggio, then we play the notes one at a time, like we did the scale. And we get those fingers back in position and we go back down. And we do that again. Let's go up the G arpeggio and back down. Now the left hand comes down to starting on G below middle C, and the same 4 fingers, the pattern all looks the same. And beauty of the harp is we don't have all those sharps and flats, i.e. black keys of the piano in our way. We have just the straight diatonic scale. So now we're going up the G arpeggio, starting in G below middle C with the left hand and back down. Okay. Before we move to the 2-hand arpeggios, let's go back to the right hand on the G arpeggio. And this time we're going to do the arpeggio in continuous form, in the same fashion that we did the scales, like so. When you get to the top of the arpeggio, you head straight back down. And when you get to the bottom, you head straight back up. So in other words, we're just tracing the notes up and down is like a continuous circle of the G arpeggio. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with the left hand and the lower octave. So same idea, same configuration, just starting on G below middle C with the left hand. Ready, begin. to the 2-octave arpeggio. Everyone who has learned from me knows that initially I had you position all 4 fingers of both hands. And I actually want you to do it now just because I want you to see the identical picture of the 2 hands transposed over one another. That what's going to become different is that the right hand has to remove its 4th finger from that G, which is already taken by the thumb of the left hand. So the 2-octave arpeggio, in this case, will be 4 fingers of the left hand, 3 fingers of the right. Okay, for now, we're just going to play up the 7 notes, sorry, altogether of the 2-octave G arpeggio. Okay, we'll do that again. For those of you who are more beginners, it may help you to position all 4 fingers of both hands and then take off that finger initially of the right hand, just to find this, because once you take that off, the right hand looks different from the left and it might confuse you. But I want you to get so used to this position that you can start to, you can play it as a solid chord, an arpeggio, as a rolled chord, or as a continuous arpeggio up and down swiftly. Or to be able to roll it up the scale like so. And back down, downward. So there in a tight little nutshell is a lot of variation that you can throw into your exercises, right? Obviously that will take some time to develop the dexterity to do it the way that I just did for some of you. But it'll come in handy for arrangements. For all these exercises will come in handy for learning the music. When the right hand has to apply itself to the melody and ornamentation, the left hand has to apply itself toward harmony and rhythmic accompaniment. And in some cases, the 2 hands will play the same melody in unison, an octave apart, as part of the arrangement. And in fact, we have an example of this on the 11th variation of Rory Dahl's Port. And it's an interesting, it's a little technical exercise. We'll go through it. But once you've learned it, the melody with the right hand, the left hand does exactly the same thing, an octave lower, just mirroring it. And so what I want to do now, though, you can, those of you who haven't done this before, you can work with my beginner video. The next step ordinarily from the 2-octave arpeggio is to start moving it up the scale. So you move all the fingers up one string. Exactly the same configuration of the hands, but as you go up these arpeggios, you find that you start encountering major and minor chords, and this is something magical in the world of music and arranging. I have what I call music theory according to the scale of arpeggios, because you will encounter the 1, 4, 5 chords and their relative minors. That high G up there is the highest, or E is the highest note on your lap harps, but of course, big harps continue up to a high C and all the way down to a very low C. But if that's as high as you can go, that's as far as you'll take it. And then try the whole thing in reverse. Back down those chords. Okay, so that completes the exercises in a nutshell. Hope I didn't go too fast for some of you, but of course you can go back and reapply yourselves to this. So the melody, let's go right to the tune, to Rory Dahl's Port. As I mentioned, I think you probably saw in my email, you might wonder about the word port. No, it doesn't refer to the lovely fortified wine. It's a Gaelic word for tune. And it's unknown whether it had a very specific tune type reference in early times. We don't know now, but we take it now simply to mean tune. So in other words, Rory Dahl's Port is Rory Dahl's tune. This was probably his signature piece. It's probably what he warmed up with when he sat down, to play his harp, or preparing for an audience with his patron or whatever. He would go through with. so that's the opening theme of the tune. Now it's got some ornamentation right there off the bat. So for you beginners, if that's a little intimidating, what I thought I'd do is show the bare bones melody without that ornamentation. Those are sequences of double grace notes. And the way that they work, it goes from the grace note up one and then back down to the melody note. So those two notes are soft, and then grace notes are always played softly so they don't overbear the melody. So here's the melody without the grace notes. And just those it's four measures, 6/8 time. 6/8 time we ordinarily think of, if we're playing Irish music, we think of jigs, but this isn't a jig. It's a different kind of feel and format of the 6/8 time. That simply means 6/8 measures or equivalent thereof per measure. That's the rhythm of the piece. And you'll notice that this is really just kind of going up and down the G scale. It's really all it's doing. That's why I consider this to be something like an exercise, a warm-up tune for the old harpers. So the first measure, we're just taking it one measure at a time. So you want to start with I'll give general indications for fingering to help you through, especially with the more complicated passages. We're going to have the four fingers, and go ahead and position them. 4, 3, 2, 1. There's a big jump between 2 and 1. So 4, 3, 2 on G, A, B. Then you're going to skip the next four strings and go right to G, the octave. You're going to play, you won't necessarily have them all in position when you start, but this is just to give you an idea. So G, A, B, B, and then jump up to the high G. That's the first measure, okay? So it's kind of like we were starting a scale, but then we jumped all the way up to the top of the octave. Okay, we're not doing ornaments yet. Come back and put those in. Now, so D, C, B, A, back to B. It's just down 4 notes and back up 1. So if we put those together, we have now that might cause some question about fingering, because we're tempted to go from the thumb down to the second finger, but then we have to get over to the A. So often what I do in a case like that is just cross over with the third finger. If I've come to my fourth and I've run out of fingers, but I need to go right back up, I need one more lower note, but need to go right back up, I'll cross over with the third finger and then come back. So in other words, okay, the third measure, same as the first. And now we have the ending. And here I bring the thumb down to the D. And just cross over for the last note with the third finger again. So there are various ways you could finger that. You could cross over right there with the thumb to the C. So I'll let you play with that individually as far as exactly how you plan to finger it. And the only idea for fingering is to try to find the path of least resistance. In other words, try to find the easiest way to get to that sequence of notes. So a lot of it really just boils down to common sense. Okay, So that first one ba, da, 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 made sense because we're just going straight up. 4, 3, 2, 2, 1. So. And then third measure, same as the first. That is the essential theme of this whole piece. And the entire 13 other variations are based upon this. And it's a similar concept. I mean, we also see this in classical music. Think of Bach's Goldberg variations. If you're familiar with those, it gets pretty complex, but it all starts out with one basic simple theme. And then it keeps extrapolating out and out and out and out and getting more and more and more complicated, and then changing rhythms, changing moods, all the way through 32 variations. So if you think this is bad, just take a quick glance at the Goldberg variations and say, oh, this is a piece of cake. Okay. Anyway, never mind that. Let's get that. Let's run through this a little bit. Follow me as best you can with that first melody. And then we're going to go back in and put the ornaments, because I want everyone to get those ornaments. They're not just kind of, they are crucial to the mood, the proper mood of the melody. Ornaments are there for a reason, of course. And as their name implies, it ornaments the melody. It gives it a little more life and substance. So let's try that from the beginning and just play it a couple of times through. You notice that each line of 4 bars, which is the theme and then extended variations, each line is only 4 bars. So that's nice that you have a limited scope of what you have to get through for each variation, right? So here we go. Let's play it 2 times through the line 1 with just the melody and without the ornaments, unless you can do the ornaments already. Some of you have probably listened and played with this, and if you have, that's great too. So follow along in whatever capacity. Here we go, 2 times through, pretty nice and slow. You're ready, begin. So notice the second 2 measures are really very much the same as the first 2, except that it puts an ending on it, on the last one, on the 4th measure. So the first is da 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 dee da 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 bum. That's the only difference. Da 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 dee da 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 bum, ends on G. One more time. Ready? Begin. Okay. Now, the way I'm going to have you accompany this, for now, ignore, for those of you who read, ignore that bass clef. For now, I'm just going to have you do one simple thing, which is this. You're just going to accompany it with an open 5th on the bass, with a G to D. Okay, that's G below middle C up to D above. Open 5th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, G, A, B, C, D. That's why it's called a 5th. Okay, and it'll work like this. Okay, so I'm just playing that drone at the beginning of each measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we are going to expound upon that a little later with the left hand. Okay, so now we've changed another chord, added some elements to the rhythm of it. Okay, it's still different from Kennard's, but it's the same tune, unmistakably the same tune, even if you listen to the way she plays it. Okay, so now let's go back and put those ornaments in. You beginners do the best you can with this. All righty. So in the first measure, after those first three notes, G, A, B. Now keep that second finger on the B, and you're going to go back and forth rapidly from B to C, back to B. So that's essentially a double grace note. In the lingo of one of my favorite Irish producers, we call that a twiddle. You do something like that on the penny whistle. That's not an official musical term, but I love the name, twiddle. So without even playing the melody at all, I want you with your pointer finger and your thumb to go back and forth rapidly between the B and the C, back to B. And try when you do that, when you come back to the B, play it a little more loudly, ideally, okay? One thing at a time, but ideally it needs to go very quickly. So practice it slowly first. And it's really just three notes, da, 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 up one, back down one, okay? Because it's that same grace note, thankfully, same place in the measure of all four measures. So listen to what I mean by that. Actually move down a step up for the second one. Okay, so it happens once in each measure. So let's try it in the first measure. And you have to get up to that high G, right? Or let's just get that much. Da, 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 and then the twiddle. B, C, B. Now bring the thumb up to the high G. And if we were to continue on the next measure, three notes, now we do the twiddle from A, B, A. Okay? And then we come back to B, and then we do the same first measure. Now for the ending, that same twiddle again on the ABA, sorry, and then finish it with a G. It's a rather quick G, but what I noticed, the last notes are all eighth notes. But what's interesting about this, if you listen to Kinnaird play it, because it's awkward to end on a fast note and jump right back to the beginning. She allows a little breath, a little pause at the end of each repeat and each phrase, and each variation has a little bit of a pause. Some have longer pauses than others. So you see there's room for freestyle, for breath in this. It's still rhythmic, still a rhythmic tune, but there's room for air, mood, and movement, okay? So here's what we have. If you include the ornaments with that nice drone of the left hand, you've got a good start on this tune, like so. Repeat. So you see how that time I didn't allow much space. I went right back to the beginning. But we're going to have some space because in some cases we're going to do something like this. Sorry. That's the first variation that I just played. Let's try this together. Let's keep it real slow. And for the beginners, the more beginning minded, if you can, or however you want to approach this, play it without the ornaments. Don't worry about the ornaments because it's a lot to think about when you're doing something like that for the first time. Okay, so here we have, and if you can, bring in the drones with the left hand, the G and the D, and here we go. And those drones just play literally on the first beat of each measure. meaning they'll only play 4 times because there's 4 measures, right? Here we go. Ready, begin. And again. Okay. Everybody good so far? Everybody okay? I'll stop at this point. I've been going for a long time without stopping for questions. Does anybody have a question? Yeah, just raise your hand or however you want to do it, or unmute yourself and holler. Anybody has a question? Heidi?
So, Philip, do you ever twiddle with your 3rd and 4th fingers?
Not very often, actually. That's a good question, because they don't move as quickly, rapidly, as easily as the thumb and forefinger do, as the first two, 1 and 2. That's a good question, though. You can, of course, and you'll, in fact, I think I'll have to go through this again on my own, but I think you will come across some places where you have to. There is one variation that has a grace note right at the beginning of it, so you have to do and that is one. I'm not sure if I was debating whether to do this one with you or not, because it's kind of tricky. It's number 7. So there you're starting with a grace note. The very first note, it's not written as a grace, but in essence it is a grace. That very first note, which is written as a 32nd, may as well be a grace note. But it was the easiest way that she could notate that. So ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. So we end up with something like this. Okay, so there's an example. And sometimes you'll start the twiddle with the 3rd finger, but come back to that same note, the 3rd note, with the 2nd finger. That can be a case too. All right, any other questions like that? That's a good one. Everybody doing okay so far with this?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I am more of a beginner, and I know
Right.
that you said that there are a couple different ways that you can finger the crossing over when you go from the first
Yes.
to the 2nd, but I would love if you would slow it down and show me what you're doing, because I'm finding myself just kind of leaving my
Okay.
2nd, 3rd, and 4th and just moving my thumb, which is not
Right.
right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So I am tending, so the first one is certain. Even though you have that twiddle in there, you're still coming up with the thumb to the top. So even if you didn't do the ornament, you're essentially. I do come down, thumbs on the high G, I come down to D with the 2nd finger. So I do that 2, 3, 4 on D, C, B. And then, and this is the example with here, I cross over with the 3rd finger, but you've got a twiddle there. So there I'm twiddling 3, 1, 2. You could do 3, 1, 3 also. Well, here's the other thing. Actually, no, this is how I do it. I'm crossing over with the 2nd, sorry, not the 3rd, to do the twiddle. And that's pretty much all you need to know for the fingering, because the next 2 measures are essentially the same, right? So here I'll just call out the fingering as I play those first 2 measures. 4, 3, 2, 2 and 2, including their ornament. Bring the thumb up to the high G. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2, 1, 2 on the twiddle. And then 1, 4. So 1, 4 from B to G. Because when you've got back to G, you're starting over again. You're on the 3rd measure, which is a repeat of the 1st measure. That make sense? Yeah.
It's certainly helpful. I'm sure it'll come easier with practice.
Okay, yeah, give that a try. And if anyone gets stuck, it's often been the case where I'll sit down and write out the fingering and rescan the music and send it to you. If that'd be helpful for you, just let me know. I can do that. So, because it is a little tricky, especially some of these variations, like number 11 is a real killer here. Because you're going all over the place. Like, what the heck fingers? I had to think about it for a while myself. Because initially I was doing 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, because it's easy. But then all of a sudden you're stuck when you have to get from up to there. So I decided that 1, 3 was better. But if 3 is hitting 2, I can get 2, 1 above it. Anyway, sorry, I'm leaping ahead there. I'm not meaning for you to understand or play what I just showed you, because we're going to come to that. All right, I'm leaping ahead. That was a little preview. So I think the main thing is to work on that first theme. Because like I said, everything else is going to expound upon that. But let me just give you a clue about number 2, because straight away it looks a little formidable with all these octaves going. Forget the octaves. The melody itself is just this. There's only one twiddle right there at the end. By the way, the last measure is almost identically the same for every single variation. You come to the 4th measure, bingo, it's the same as it's always been. You keep coming home to that 4th measure with some subtle variations here and there. Like on line number 3, all of a sudden it jumps to a higher note for the first part of it, but all the other ones are the same. But so how I did that, if you're going to ignore the upper octave notes on the first 2 measures, but here's the trick. When you get to the 3rd measure, you're going to ignore the lower octave notes on the second half of that measure. In other words, you've got the first 3 notes are the lower ones, and the next 3 notes are the higher one. What she's doing there is inverting the harmony. So in other words, so here's how it's actually played, the way it's written. That's what throws you off. That's the last 3 notes of the 3rd measure, and then comes finally da 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 da. Okay. So that's why I'm saying I probably could have circled those to help single that out if you just want to play the melody, which I would suggest. Okay. So the lower, we're just looking at the right hand, not the bass clef at all, just the right hand. So use the lower sequence of notes until you get to the 3rd measure. The last 3 notes will be the upper sequence. So it'll end up sounding like this. So that's the first variation. Okay, so we'll work on that one next week. But now for just a little bit, take it easy. And I'm just going to run through some of these to give you an idea of what they will sound like. And we won't necessarily do all the variations that I singled out. For the beginners, my thought is to get 1 for sure and the last one for sure. The last one is grand and it's not hard to play. 14 sort of takes the whole thing to a grand conclusion. So 1 and 14 for sure, I want everyone to learn, and then one of the ones in between, if not 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. We've got a total of 10 that I've circled here, right? And each one does something different. It's a wonderful fingering exercise. So right off on the 3rd variation, we've got these 16th notes going. And the thing about that is, though they look tricky, there's a lot of repetition of pattern. You can always see a pattern going on repeating. So in other words, it starts out like this. Sorry. Then it does exactly the same thing, moved up 1 note. Then back to the first one again. and then the ending. So we keep coming back to the familiar last fourth measure. So you can see that it's not as formidable as it might look. So. Now the third variation starts up high, or the number 4. So I think of the first as being the theme, but we've numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4. So number 4, which is the third variation, goes up high. And then we're skipping, or no, 5. Well, 5 is what I call the church bells variation. This is where you're just playing simple intervals, starting with thirds to sixths, and then thirds to fifths. Like, so this is really interesting. I just love the simplicity of this. Okay, and that repeats. And you can see there's not even a left hand written in for that. You just want to hear those lovely church bells. And then I bypassed 6 because it has some accidentals in there that are really curious. It's the only place that they occur. And I just learned today in reading through the historical text of Alison Kinnaird book that in fact, in the 17th century was just the very beginning of starting to use levers on harps. They had developed a brass blade. So it's conceivable that some of these harpers actually had those blades and could do those modulations. Because here you have to be able to get a C sharp and then take it off again for C natural and so forth. But we're leaving that variation alone. Not touching that one. One after it is the one that I showed you, 7. I didn't circle it because it's a tricky one, where it starts right off with a grace note. But number 8 is pretty cool because once you get the idea of what this is doing, this repeating pattern, it's a really good fingering exercise. It's all of this is stretching out your fingers. It's really a great tune for that. So that's number 8. 9 and 10 are the 2 that are omitted from Kinnaird's own recording. So I just completely ignore those. We get to 11 and 12. And I call these one the lower train tracks and the upper train tracks. Because it starts with, that's a great finger twister right there. But it's, again, a lot of repetition. And then we come back to that familiar ending. Da, 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 bum. So now the upper train tracks, we go. You see, it's a constant repetition. And then that good old familiar ending. Now we're getting close to the end. Number 13, and this one's pretty important. And then my favorite, number 14. And there I broke the rules by just allowing myself to put in a nice fully rolled 4-finger chord, thirds and all, root, third, fifth, octave. But it's actually written sparsely. And it sounds good that way as well. And in fact, for the larger harp, you're down here. You're just ascending from the low G in its octave. So what I did, of course, for you lap harps, you're going to do it here. You can do the octaves, but you just have to do it up here. But you can also add the fifth into that. See? And if you add the full chord and include the third, you've got this lushly harmonic. And all of it harmonizes, all of it works. And then the very final, repetition, we end up with a nice big sweeping G chord. Okay, so that's Rory Dahl's Port in a nutshell. Hopefully you've got a good start on that tune, and this gives you a good feel for the Scottish style harp music. And hopefully you've all had a chance to download the track from Alison Kinnaird. The track the link that I gave you actually sends you to her Scottish harp compilation, which is good. It has some of the pieces from the harp key, but just so that I can make you support Alison Kinnaird even further, if you happen to get that album, I really recommend you get this one. And this one also has Princess Augusta. Interestingly, that tune is a Neil Gow tune, so it would have been composed on the fiddle originally, but still in the 1700s. And Alison Kinnaird takes it up and makes an arrangement, but she has the melody taken by mandolin and a penny whistle while she's just doing accompaniments on the harp. But when I heard the tune, and this is over 40 years ago, I was so enchanted by the melody that I thought this is a great harp tune, and I arranged it myself for the harp. So the music you see is my arrangement and not the way Alison Kinnaird plays it. You can even barely hear the harp in her arrangement, but it's a lovely arrangement, and it's my original source for that tune for anyone who might have worked with it before with me. We'll revisit that one because it's such an appropriate element to our theme of Irish Scottish music. So Alison Kinnaird, question? Yeah, Sue.
Yes, what was the name of that album that you held up?
Oh, it's called The Harp Key. And I'll send this to you. I'll send you a link.
The Harp Key.
I don't know if you can.
Okay, thank you.
That. Yeah. The
Oh, yeah,
Harp
okay,
Key.
thank you.
And there's 16 tracks on this. Some of it gets a little repetitive and some of it feels a little more, well, to put it maybe judiciously, musically, it's not my favorite harp album. Not my favorite, but it's such a great album for source of tunes and material. And she is a good player, and she came from the classical tradition, but not the classical harp tradition. She came from sort of a Scottish, well, she explains it all on the CD, how she then began to research the old harpers and their music. And so she really does put her own spirit into it. It's a great album, and it's a great source of tunes. And there is one Irish tune on there, the slip jig, Kid on the Mountain, which was another tune that I loved so much. I learned how to play it a long time ago, and I have to revisit it because I haven't played it forever. But it's a great tune. Slip jigs are in a 9/8 time, and it's a really cool rhythm and form of dance music. So the harp key, and then this is the accompanying book. Okay, so all the pieces, not all of them, because Princess Augusta isn't on there, but this book, and I'll write all this down for you and I'll send you a link, because I really highly recommend, for our subject matter, this is a great source material with lots of, I mean, the first, 5-6 pages is all about the history, history, lots of history. And then it talks very detailed about the, ornamentation here. She talks about all the different kinds of grace notes and gives illustrations from the tunes themselves, which Rory Dahl Port is part of them. It's just a great resource, really, really, really great. And so is the album. So highly recommend it. I'll send you links to those. Yeah. And anything else that you think of, that any questions you may have, like how do I find this, or what's, what's the story behind that, or what's the source for this, feel free to email me, call me, whatever. Not good at answering phone calls, although if you call my shop phone and listen to my outgoing message, it does reveal my cell phone. And that's for a reason. You can call my cell phone if you really need to. And you might well reach me. And that's totally fine. I give you all total permission to call my cell phone. If you're stuck on something, please call me and or email me. I check emails all the time, every day. So any questions so far? I probably didn't cover as much as I ideally would have loved to, but I think we got a good start on this tune. I've got 5 tunes in mind altogether, and we may not get to all of them, but at least we'll touch upon them. The last one being Farewell to Whiskey was the last one I was going to do. It's another Neil Gow tune, but it's just a beautiful melody. And I have yet to notate that. And I also don't have notation for Give Me Your Hand, which is an exquisite harp composition, again by Rory Dahl. But that's a beautiful piece with a wonderful story behind it. And it may be familiar to some of you if you've heard it, because it's as it starts out with this lovely. So you may have heard that tune. It's really just a lovely piece. And like I said, a lovely story behind it. We'll get to that later. Any other questions? We have managed, I think, to cover an hour there. We can go a little longer, but I don't want to keep the East Coast people up too late. We can go. I can go on with questions. If anybody has more questions, I'm happy to stay here for a while and answer any other questions. Of which all the ones that you've asked tonight have all been really good questions, and so I appreciate it. I appreciate feedback and I appreciate questions, because I never know exactly what you're all thinking as I'm teaching you and wondering how well you're able to grasp all this crazy stuff I'm throwing at you. So, but if you can, now if you learn that first line of Roy Dahl's chord with the ornamentation, that right there is a huge foothold into the world of the Scottish harp, right there, even if you just play those simple drones for accompaniment. And then we'll see how the Scottish crosses and blends with the Irish. And particularly when we come to Carolyn's variations on When She Can Bend, because Carolyn, I think, as most of you know, is the famous Irish harper from the 1700s, whose music we have the most of all the historical harpers. He is the most well-known, most famous, and lots of wonderful melodies that he composed, all on the harp. We know he composed them on the harp. That's what he played. Some of these tunes, you know, Allison says there's question as to whether it originated on the harp or not, but that doesn't matter because musicians at that time were constantly cross-fertilizing their tunes, so to speak. So the fact that Neil Gow composed his tunes on the fiddle doesn't mean that they aren't appropriate for the harp or on other instruments. People play them on the pipes, play them on the flute. And anytime I hear a tune that I really love and it catches my imagination, my first thought is, how would that work on the harp? And most of the time I can make it work on the harp. Sometimes I find, no, it just really isn't a harp-like tune. It's not, but there's so much that is. You can almost take anything and apply it to the harp. Any other questions? I think I saw a hand. Yes, Debbie.
Just a couple of pieces of feedback. One, I'm more of a beginner. So, anything where especially there's tricky fingering, love to see your idea of fingering. And then one thing that's just really helpful during class like this, because I'm not able to look at the music and look at you and look at my hands. So when you call out the notes, that really helps me. So just some feedback. That was lovely. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for that feedback. I'm glad to know that. It's a curious when I'm doing this virtually and I'm not with you in person. It's a curious blend of drawing upon my years of experience teaching groups in person, teaching private lessons, and trying to approach it somewhat that way. So all that feedback is helpful. And I know I'm particularly concerned about leaving the beginners behind if I get going too fast with some of the other stuff. So feel free to throw a rope at me and say, wait, slow down, put some reins on me. Or just ask the question. But just like you pointed out, that's good. I can certainly do more of that. And I think that's helpful for everyone anyway.
Philip,
Yeah,
for the beginners, looking at the floor of your studio and the paneling behind, it's difficult to see your harp strings.
okay. I wonder about that.
Uh, You know,
You can find a black background or something.
black drape
Yeah,
something would help
okay, yeah,
behind, just so people could see your strings.
okay. Yeah, no, I know that could be an issue, especially with all that wood paneling. I did try setting up a black drape once and it kept falling down. I just have to build a frame, a stand for it. And I think that will help. Okay, thanks for that, Anne. Does everyone pretty much agree with that? Is it hard to see my strings? Yeah. Okay, got to do something about it. All right, I'll work on it. Thanks for that, Anne. Anything else from you wonderful folks? Okay. Well, I think then we can call it an evening. I'll be sending out some more materials, as I like to do. And I think what I'll do, at least try to get as far as the first page of Rory Dahl's port, mapping out the fingering that I see would be best. I know that's helpful for everyone, advanced as well. So let's do that. Even though Allison herself didn't give any tips for fingering, shame on her, no. Maura Nikasi on her book has everything absolutely mapped out. She's got all the fingering, all the brackets and the whole works. How she does that, I don't know. But anyway, so that'll be a good project for me. I will work on that, and I shall see you all next week then. Thank you all for